Good morning, everyone. First, let me express my appreciation to the organizers of this conference, to Carmi and the officers of PIEP for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to talk about our work. I work at the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. It's the premier development agency of the US government. Development assistance to the Philippines is basically channeled chiefly through USAID. And USAID has been here already for over 50 years. I think we're already 55 years in the Philippines, so we've quite had an extensive experience, especially working at different levels of government in different areas, including urban planning. The previous speaker, Professor Brillantes, was actually my professor in UP, so I missed his lectures. But after listening to him, I feel tired because it's like doing not a marathon, it was actually like running a sprint, no? So we'll kind of slow things a bit with my presentation, and hopefully we can provide you some information, and we can have a discussion later. So I was assigned basically to talk about the rise of secondary cities. So I'm sure all of you know the difference between primate or mega cities and secondary cities. In USAID, we basically took recognition that the potential of secondary cities, but also the need of secondary cities for assistance, no? And basically that's the gist of my presentation today, no? So my outline will talk about these topics, no? And I'll go very fast for some of them, since you're quite familiar. The trend towards urbanization, for example, and I'll talk about the rise of secondary cities, and we'll try to identify, at least from USAID's point of view, what are the secondary cities in the Philippines? And then what are the challenges, in our view, that these secondary cities face? And what are the kind of best practices there are that we can emulate and pursue and try to support? And then finally, I'll do a bit of advertisement. We have this ongoing project called Strengthening Urban Resilience for Growth with Equity, or the SURGE project. Some of you might be familiar with this. We have contracted an organization called ICMA, or International City and County Managers Association. It's a 100-year-old organization based in the US, and they're currently implementing this project for us. And we have, through the SURGE project, we have partnered with a number of cities, and I will talk about that in a while. So all of you are familiar with this. Basically, there's a growing trend of urbanization. At some point, the global population by 2050, more than 2/3 of the global population will be on urban centers. So for you guys, really, there's a big demand for your work and your expertise. In fact, already in 2007, urban population already exceeds the rural population. I was yesterday at the Philippine Development Forum, and as usual, NEDA would present its plans for the next Philippine Development Plan. And we've been advocating basically that there should be a focus on urbanization as a separate chapter. If you've seen the previous PDP, there are no urban chapters. Usually the PDP is organized by sectors. We've been trying to advocate that the Philippine government tries to think about urbanization as a development priority. And that's really reflective of the challenges that we face in the near future, today and in the near future. So just look at the statistics also for the Philippines. Almost 77% of the Philippine population are expected to live in urban areas by 2030. So this is not just in Metro Manila, of course. This would spread around the other 140 cities and other municipalities across the country. So with rising populations in urban centers, of course, will give rise also to rising demand for services and other kind of development systems. one of the reasons why we highlight secondary cities is precisely the problem here in the Philippines, and we've experienced this in Metro Manila, of the problem of congestion and concentration. If you look at the left side of the map, the urban population is concentrated in and around Metro Manila. So Metro Manila alone is 28.3%, but if you include Region 3 and 4, so Cavite and the nearby area of Laguna, which is really, from some respects, already part of Metro Manila, the population basket is even bigger. And if you look at the contribution to GDP, you see the same picture, basically. So almost 38% of GDP comes from Metro Manila. And if we include, again, Regions 3 and 4, that amounts to about 62% of GDP is accounted by the National Capital Region and the adjoining regions. Now, if we talk about inclusive growth and resolving poverty, there's really a need to deconcentrate economic opportunity, allow other growth areas, support other growth areas, and of course, decongest the cities outside of Metro Manila. So, in USAID's perspective, we are trying to assist a process where people don't have to come here to NCR to find jobs and look for opportunity. They can stay where they are, in their respective areas. So, in that respect, a strategy of deconcentration or decongestion, for that matter, should include a strategy of promoting secondary cities. So, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, here's another interesting statistic. The growing urbanization will actually not happen in mega cities. They will happen mostly in cities below 5 million below. And much greater actually for populations between 300 to 500,000. And if you do by our demographics, many of our secondary cities are between 300 and 500,000 population. I think Cebu is about a little over 1 million. Tacloban says they have a daytime population of over 1 million, but their resident population is under 300,000 or 300 to 400,000. So that's about the average. And the projections are more people will come into this, what we call secondary cities or medium-sized cities, not in the mega cities. So what are these attributes of these secondary cities that we try to, how does one qualify to become a secondary city? And I think we look, when we try to select the cities that we were going to partner with, we look at certain criteria. And some of them, I will outline some of them. So, for example, on the economic side, there's discussion about helping potential economic growth hubs, where secondary cities can serve that function. So, obviously, we'll look at those qualities of economic growth hubs. They should be centers of subnational trade, finance, and consumption. So, there must be local demand for that matter. There must be local drivers of economic growth. They should have an ample financial sector. In many cases, we try to look for the local bankers association and we collaborate with them because they best know what the financial capabilities are, our assets are in that particular subnational area. There should be at least higher levels of, or not a potential for driving investment, industry, technology, and services. In many of the cities that I've gone through across the country, many of them are still primarily agriculture. Many do not have really any semblance of industrial or manufacturing foundations. But to grow as an economic growth hub, there must be investments in those areas, not just agriculture or services, but certainly in manufacturing and industry as well. And then finally, there must be a strong concentration of labor skills, labor pool. And I remember Joel Yu, who was used to be the director of Cebu's investment promotion agency, or what's limiting Cebu's growth is its population. Cebu's population is about 1.2 or 3. He wished that the population would grow faster because some companies and some investors look for the size of the market. And they're still attracted to Manila because Manila presents a 15 to 17 billion based market. So unless you have that sizable market, then maybe investors will not look there. And then, of course, the labor pool in itself, that you have the right skills. And that brings up the issue of the universities and university hubs, as Dr. Brillantes a while ago talked about. No? In many of the cities also, they are essentially administrative centers from a public service point of view. They are regional centers for many of the national government agencies, but also the provincial and the city governments are located in their areas. They provide services for health, security, and welfare. But I think one more important aspect is also that they have broad tax bases. In that sense, they have the potential to mobilize revenue to finance urbanization. Ultimately, urbanization costs money. Now, where will that money come from? Who will finance urbanization? Actually, I wanted to ask Dr. Brillantes the same thing. No? Who will finance federalism? Federalism costs money. Now, are you willing to pay two kinds of taxes? Tax at the state level and tax at the federal level. Now we only pay one level of tax. No? It's only at the national level. So ultimately, when we talk about urbanization, we talk about financing urbanization. So tax base is very important. The ability to mobilize local revenue is a very important consideration to finance infrastructure and to meet the rising demand for public services. One of the other aspects we look at secondary cities is really the potential for connectivity. Logistics and connectivity are very important criteria. The presence of ports or seaports, the presence of airports, their ability to move and transfer goods and services and people and communication. In many places we see they don't have airports or airports that are not being used. They have ports that are in disrepair. These are important elements if these secondary cities will connect to not just the national markets, but also to the global markets and regional market in Southeast Asia. Dr. Brillantes talked about this, the importance of universities in each secondary cities. Many of the secondary cities we work in have several universities, both public SUCs and private universities, at the minimum 3 or 4 or 5. No? And they should be concentrations of knowledge and development. And we need to push also these universities to pay attention to research and development and as drivers of innovation. Ultimately, one of the characteristics of cities are its ability to drive innovation. Because of the concentration of talent, concentration of people, it makes it conducive for the transfer of knowledge and sharing of knowledge. And that should be also, we should pay attention also to the environment that fosters knowledge and learning. And finally, of course, cities are not just physical structures. They are also, on the soft side, cultural. We should think about them as cultural and social hubs. No? Ultimately, cities are community of persons. How do you ensure that this community of persons have shared values and shared ideas? Through their culture, there are meeting points, and in terms of arts and other cultural events. There have been discussions in other forums about open spaces, and I'm sure as planners you know much about this. Open spaces are not just a spatial consideration. It's also a cultural consideration because open spaces are usually places where people congregate and meet and exchange ideas. And these are important. Our open spaces should be not just malls. No? In fact, malls are not good open spaces because people just go shopping. No? They don't really talk to each other. But there should be parks and other social spaces where people can congregate and exchange ideas. So, in our view, these are the potential secondary cities in the Philippines. Places like Baguio, Legazpi, Tacloban, Ormoc, Butuan, Cagayan de Oro, General Santos, Zamboanga, Tagbilaran, Puerto Princesa, Iloilo, Batangas, and Angeles City. And this is just a sample. No? There are several other with huge potential, but these are the cities we thought that might have a better chance to qualify for the criteria I just mentioned. No? So all of them have potential in varying degrees. Just to mention, for example, Iloilo, Puerto Princesa, and Tagbilaran, just look at this particular sample. Really, you see them as thriving business centers. The number of business registrations have been going up. And that tells us really, for outsiders like me, that they're already, the locals are taking the initiative to drive the economy. And really, it's up to the locals to do the first move. No? If locals are not willing to invest in their own economy, outside investors will not be convinced. So really, usually it's the local businessmen who are the first movers in any secondary city growth. No? Let me just cite a couple of examples, and perhaps you already know this, no? Being to these areas. Cagayan de Oro, for example, certainly is in already the momentum to be the next urban center, no? Especially for that particular region in northern Mindanao. They all already have the elements, no? And talk about ecosystems also. They become a strong hub for both the Lagandingan and Iligan side as well as the Guimaras side. No? So they become a potential growth hub. And we see that already being manifested in many respects. So they have a strong airport, and there are already plans to even expand that airport to become a truly international airport. They have the FIFIDEC Mindanao Container Port, which is a world-class international container port. It's now driving traffic for most of northern Mindanao. Much of Bukidnon traffic and exports go through MCT. And of course, you see the local investors also driving a lot of the investment. A lot of hotels are coming up. A lot of businesses are investing. You know, Lipket-Kai is already being congested. There's already traffic there. It used to be, I remember, there was nothing there. And other elements, no? MUST is there. The universities, I think Capital University is in that place. And other private universities, Xavier is also there. And of course, they have a lot more potential. Their land area is actually much bigger than the urban core. So there's still a lot of potential for expansion and development. And of course, the other boomtown is Iloilo. I remember when we first started in Iloilo, the locals were not investing in their own economy. Iloilo was a surplus capital. They were exporting their capital to investments in Cebu and Metro Manila. But now Iloilo is now a boomtown with new convention centers, new hotels, a new airport, a new avenue, a new esplanade, and more things to come. No? They're planning a new port as well. And I think Iloilo has waken up from its slumber, no? And hopefully we'll have more aggressive investors among the local constituents. No? But certainly outsiders are already in Iloilo, the Ayalas, the other developers are there. No? So hopefully Iloilo will regain its title as Queen of the South, no? Away from Cebu. So, but what are the challenges to growing urbanization? All of these cities are growing, and certainly we need to address the issues that confront them. Again, there will be higher demand with growing populations and in migration. There will be higher demand for services. And in these two aspects, water, for example, as I went around all of the cities, many of their priority problems were water access and sanitation. So in a place like San Fernando City, for example, 85% have no water access. In Mati, 82% do not have water access. But even in Tacloban, as they try to develop the north, as they resettle many of the people there, and they plan to settle 40% of Tacloban's population up north in northern Tacloban, there is no water access in the northern part. So it's primarily a resettlement area where people don't have the basic services. Cost of power is also important. Even in places where they're near power plants or near distribution areas, the price of power is still very high. So this is also a major problem. In Zamboanga, for example, they still have roll-on, roll-off brownouts. Power fluctuations is the norm. And the cost of electricity is very high. So for the cities to be competitive, they have to, of course, lower the cost of power. And of course, there's the whole area of ease of doing business. How is it easy for investors to locate in these cities? And there are many problems. Just getting a business permit sometimes takes a long time. Dealing with City Hall is very complicated. And there's usually an inadequate supply of infrastructure as well. So corruption also is a major issue, of course, not just at the national level, but at the local level, and it hinders business. So we try to, for example, streamline areas in, like, for example, business permit, where we try to help City Hall reduce the time, steps, and costs of issuing permits. I mentioned about the importance of financing, and in many of these cities, they're still very era-dependent. We should reach the levels of Metro Manila at least, which is, they're only era-dependent by 22%. So mostly comes from local revenue. Cebu City is only 37%. But in many of the cities, as you see from the left side, they're dependent over 75%. So a lot will depend on intergovernmental transfers from the central government. And, the question of federalism should also pose that question. We should pose this question. Whether, as federal states, they can survive on their own. Do they have enough own source revenue to support the demands brought about by a federal state government? So era dependency will have to be discussed. So we've been also looking at alternatives for forms of financing for urban development, like PPPs, municipal bonds, borrowing from the private banks, etc., or ODA for that matter. So what are some of the best practices in the cities? Of course, on the resilience parts, many of our cities are vulnerable to disasters and typhoons and all of these weather occurrences that it's a matter of when, not if. And Legazpi City is really a model for disaster preparedness and risk reduction, as well as coping. So Legazpi is already recognized by Gawad Kalinga for many of these efforts, and it's good to emulate. In the case of Iloilo, they made big investments in infrastructure. They have one power plant already that has producing surplus power. I think there are plans to even invest in another power plant, right, Butch? So there's another power plant being planned, and they have also investments in planning investments in water, recognizing the higher demand in water. They've also made huge investments, not just in the airport, but also road infrastructure. Now there are bypass roads around the city, so you do not have to go through the city if you move from maybe Guimaras to Iligan. No, I'm thinking of Cagayan de Oro, between in and around Panay Island. I get confused about the cities at sometimes. And in case of easing doing business, Cagayan de Oro is, of course, a model here. They're one of the first that automated and put completely online the access to construction permits. And they did this through a local effort. MUST actually developed the software, and by the way, that software is freeware. Other local governments can avail of the same service, and they've basically eased the time and process to obtain construction permits. Now, and we all know as planners how convoluted and complicated obtaining construction permits are, no, and how corrupt that process is, no. And Cagayan de Oro has led the way here, and that should be emulated as well, no. And there have been reforms also on the business permit side by other cities. Batangas City has done it, Cagayan de Oro as well. So at this point, I'd like to end my presentation with a short video about the search project, and then we can be open for discussion later. So as you can see from the video, we're currently partnered with 6 cities, Batangas, Iloilo, Cagayan de Oro, Puerto Princesa, Tagbilaran, and Zamboanga City. Some of our partners are actually here attending, and we're in the process of actually expanding that partnership to more cities. We're now in the process of selecting the next partners. We don't know how many actually we will add yet. We've done our short list already, and we're considering other secondary cities. So we're expanding our assistance to even more cities. And by the way, for cities that are not covered, we try to work with the League of Cities of the Philippines and the other leagues as well, as way of broadening the knowledge sharing among two other potential cities as well, candidate cities that do not necessarily come under the partnership. But just let me emphasize also the third component of the project. We try to emphasize also urban-rural connectivity. So that really means also working with, let's say, in the case of Cagayan de Oro, metro CDO type of concept, or in the case of Iloilo, the Migetsi setup, no? And we've seen that also in other areas where you cannot limit planning and development within just the city boundaries. Necessarily, they have to coordinate with adjoining municipalities and also work with the provincial government. So we're also engaging at those levels. So that ends my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.